Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, is my good friend, Drew Crawley. Drew, what's up?
Howdy. Oh, I am in my favorite place on earth, Nashville, Tennessee. We're getting ready to start another round of recording in the morning. So just got here. There's a house full of wild boys drinking whiskey and playing with guitars and watching football and eating hot wings. So I'm as happy as I ever will be.
That's fantastic. So recording on album number 2 starts
Yes, sir.
tomorrow.
Starts
Awesome.
tomorrow. Yep.
And
So very excited to get in there.
When will this be released?
We're still working on it. The game plan is maybe late February, early March. A lot of it's just going to depend on how fast we can get it all tracked. It's all written, it's all arranged. It's just how quickly can I afford more studio time? So,
But for now,
yes,
you've got the first EP, Tower Songs.
Yep.
That folks can stream on Apple or Spotify or YouTube, and then you've got a single out from that will be on the new album, right? Or is it just
that's correct? Yep. Nope. That'll be the first single, and we'll have another one out hopefully in November, and then I may have teased it on here before. I'm not sure, but we have an acoustic EP that will be coming out hopefully right around Christmas. So that'll be just some new stuff and some old stuff. Just decided to do an acoustic version, so excited to just put that out there and see how it is in the world. So yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. And so tonight we've got I'm looking forward to this show for a long time. We've got Brian Haara on here with us, author of the wonderful book Bourbon Justice, and we're going to get into some Bourbon Justice. We're going to get into some bourbon. We're going to get into some music, and we're going to talk about some music justice. This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful, epic show. But before we start down that path with Brian, because once we get on it, man, we're going to hit the ground running with it. We want to tell you a little bit about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart is a collection of friends that everybody's got a little different take on the whiskey industry. There is Distillers Talk, which is a podcast with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. Those shows drop usually on Fridays, and they will talk with distillers from across the country and really around the world. Alan also has a show called If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, where he talks about the spiritual side of the spirits industry. So that's pretty interesting. He does that with his wife, Kim. And on Monday nights, My Whiskey Den is a show that focuses on craft whiskey. And that is a YouTube show that airs Monday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern time with Pat and Mike, and Ben is on there sometimes. And then we've got our show, Bourbon Turntable, which you already know and love. Now we've got one more announcement for you.
All right. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification to find out when new episodes come out, which is every Wednesdays on all of your streaming services everywhere. Apple, Spotify, whatever other ones there are, and the YouTube where you can watch the live recording itself.
Thanks, Mike. You are a professional genius as always. We appreciate your time. So without further ado, Brian, welcome to the show.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks. I'm excited for it.
This is going to be a lot of fun. But before we dig into anything else, we want to give everybody a chance to get to know you a little bit. And you are an attorney, a real live attorney. You just don't play one on TV. You're an actual lawyer, right?
It's my actual day job. And even more than that, part of what I do is in the spirits world. So I've been able to expand beyond that for the Bourbon Justice and for talking with you guys. But yeah, the thing that I go in every day for the office for is law.
Yeah. So how did you get into bourbon? Are you just part of life being in Kentucky, or?
Well, I found it to be that, but I'm a transplant. I moved to Lexington in 1993, and my first sip of bourbon was in Commonwealth Stadium at my very first SEC game. And I'm sure it was something that was on a law school student's budget. I can't remember what it was, but it was awful. I didn't like it neat out of the flask. I tried to mix it. I wasn't a cola fan, so Commonwealth was a Pepsi stadium, so they had Sprite. So I'm mixing it with Sprite. I didn't like that either. So it took some warming up. But when you're in Kentucky, you really can't, as they say, swing a dead cat or whatever the thing without hitting bourbon. And I couldn't find my Milwaukee's Best Light and the other thing up in Michigan, and I really warmed up to it. And then once I heard the historical side of it, then once I could afford things like Makers, when you blew the bank on getting a bottle of Makers,
right?
Then I was like, okay, yeah, this I can do, and it's been a love affair ever since.
Yeah.
So
how did you get the idea for the book Bourbon Justice, and tell people a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. It's so I try to tell the story of bourbon through lawsuits. So I tried really hard not to make it a law school book. It's not a law book. It tells bourbon stories, but I use fights from distillers in the 1800s and early 1900s and through to almost current day as my source material. So still trying to tell those stories, but I'd read the other bourbon books, and you hear marketers talk, and I slowly learned those weren't exactly the most accurate of stories. And I started looking, how do you find out what really happened? And marketing and legends and the things that the brands say can only take you so far. And one day I don't know if this was a meant to be type thing or not, but we'd all been to Woodford Reserve, how many times? You guys probably have lost track. Whenever people come in from out of state, that's one you bring them to. So about 10 years ago, I had been to Woodford for the however many time. And that following Monday, I'm researching at the office, something totally unrelated to bourbon, nothing to do in the spirits world. But when we search, it's Boolean searches where you get a lot of false hits on whatever it is you're searching. And most of the time you can tell right away it's not a case, anything you need to know about, and you just move on. And I must have had extra time because this 1800 and something case comes up, and I can tell it's about bourbon. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna read this case. I know it has nothing to do with what I'm researching, but I'm gonna read it. And pretty quickly I realized that they were talking about where I had just been this previous weekend. They were talking about Woodford.
Yeah.
They were calling it LeBreau and Graham, which people who remember when the bottle first came out, it was LeBreau and Graham's Woodford Reserve. And it started talking about James Crowe, and it started talking about E.H. Taylor and Pepper. And I had never heard those names associated with Woodford Reserve. And so again, this is around 2012, 2013. We just had the tour. The tour guide didn't say anything about Pepper, didn't say anything about Crowe, nothing about Taylor. And I'm just floored. Here I'm looking at history, a significant development in the bourbon world in the late 1800s was James Pepper going bankrupt, losing his father's and grandfather's distillery, E.H. Taylor bailing him out, E.H. Taylor going bankrupt, and LeBreau and Graham buying it from Stagg, who took it over from E.H. Taylor. And it fascinated me, but more than almost fascinating me, it really surprised me that they wouldn't have said a single word about that. And so when I had more time, I started looking for other bourbon stories, because I slowly realized that I guess during Prohibition, all of these facts were swept aside, thrown out. No one ever wanted to think about it again for that period. But the only place that you can find these facts were the old law records, the circuit court files that made it to the archives in Frankfurt. And I get there and I'm reading deposition transcripts that are written in like this constitutional script. and I'm reading about the Stagg and Taylor lawsuits, and I'm reading about all these other things and seeing these exhibits that were used in trials. And all of that stuff was gone, but for the legal system. So I started blogging about it on something called Sippin' Corn. And then Fred Minnick, actually, who wrote my foreword for the book, he said, no one else is writing it from this standpoint. You've got to write the book. bourbon is going to take off. It had already sort of taken off, but it hadn't quite hit the level of craze that it is now. And Fred's really the one who said, you've got to put this in a book. He had by the time written Whiskey Women and I think one more. I don't think he had gotten to Bourbon Curious yet.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, you've got to write this. Yeah. So with his inspiration, with a lot of help and patience and inspiration from my wife, Bourbon Justice came out.
Yeah.
Very cool. It's a great read, man. I know. I mean, for those that haven't read it, pick it up. I read it right when it came out and then kind of re-thumbed through it when we found out we were going to have you on. And it's just, I think you accomplished exactly what you set out to do in telling the story of whiskey, and bourbon specifically. But yeah, it was fantastic read.
Yeah.
Thank you. That warms my heart.
Yeah. So people can pick this up on Amazon, hardback, paperback, and even on Kindle. So any other places local that carry the book?
I know Carmichael's has it. And so I was just talking to the folks there. They brought it to I do continuing legal education seminars and they were there with the book. So I know they've got it. Mm-hmm. Barnes and Noble, maybe hit or miss. They had it early on, but they don't tend to order unless people ask for it. So if you're in Barnes and Noble, ask for it.
I know it's in the gift shop at Old Forester and Heaven Hill.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm trying to get it to the gift shops, and they have been fantastic for getting in there. It should be at Evan Williams downtown. Mm-hmm. And hopefully more. So if you find yourself in a distillery gift shop, mention it too, because I think that's where it needs to be. Folks maybe can get a bottle of something special while they're there, but they can also get a book.
Mm-hmm. Now, how often do you speak about this topic to either other attorneys at some sort of continuing education or at bourbon functions?
Yeah, it's been remarkable. It's blown my mind, the interest that lawyers have in hearing about bourbon law. So I do a continuing ed seminar probably 5-6 times a year.
Wow.
And the ones that, believe this or not, the ones that get the highest ratings are the one that we couple with a tasting. So
shocking.
It might not be Bourbon Justice entirely that's responsible for the high rating, but the ones who couple it with a tasting have done really, really well.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I'm an accountant, so if we could then couple some sort of whiskey tasting with accounting CPE, that would be awesome too. So
that's the way to do it.
I don't see that happening. But, you talk about the story of bourbon being told through lawsuits and through the legal system. There's a lot of the story of whiskey that gets told through the IRS and the IRS documents. And we have a friend, Todd Leopold, out in Colorado, who he was trying to research this 3-chamber still. Mm-hmm. And the way that he found out about it and the way that he was able to get most of the information was through IRS records.
That's amazing. I never would have thought of that, but that's exactly the same thing I did. And I think you're right, because whiskey has paid for every war we've ever fought.
Right.
It's always been taxed, and there's all kinds of records. That means there has to be records about the size of the stills, the types of stills, the amount that's in bond, the amount that gets burned up in a fire. All of that thing is going to be in IRS records. That's right. Yeah. That's remarkable.
Yeah.
So cool.
But, hey, let's have something to drink. So the first thing that we're going to be drinking tonight is an E.H. Taylor small batch. And I think you guys both have that as well. And for those that don't know, that's what that bottle looks like. And you can see the script signature there, which has some legal implications all on its own. So, gentlemen, cheers.
Cheers. I had forgotten how much I liked this one. It's not really on shelves all that much anymore. No. It's just really good.
Yeah. It's solid.
It's one of of stuff that comes out of Buffalo Trace. It's probably my favorite And but how many different whiskeys that come out of there share the same mash bill? So who knows? But I tend to gravitate to this one whenever I get an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's really nice. It not having an age on it, I think worries some people, but it's always been solid. I mean, they are picking they're picking from the right barrels for this.
Yeah, I think you're right. So tell us about E.H. Taylor and how he plays into Bourbon Justice.
Yeah, he's probably the person with the most prominent role.
Yeah.
I know we're going to get into consumer protection later, but he was a driving force for that. But outside of consumer protection, he was the litigious guy. So I guess you write about what your source material tells you, and he's my source material. So many lawsuits.
Yeah.
He in particular fought with Stagg for about 13 years after the two of them split ways. That's in 1887 when Taylor started the Old Taylor Distillery, built the castle that we all know as Castle and Key, and fought with Stagg because Stagg continued to use the Old Taylor, or I'm sorry, the OFC name along with Taylor's name with what was the OFC. And then Taylor also had about an 8 or 9 year lawsuit with another Colonel Taylor named Marion Taylor, who, for the Louisville folks watching this, there's a Marion Taylor building. Folks might know the Wright and Taylor Distillery. So he was a big deal of his own on his own right at the time, but he was a rectifier. And that's who E.H. Taylor hated the most. I mean, they were the devil to him. So the two Colonel Taylors fought because Marion was a rectifier and was selling things that he was marketing as straight bourbon whiskey that was really just neutral grain spirits and a few other things. So E.H. Taylor really was most of my source material. I could have probably written a lot more about him just because of the number of lawsuits he had.
Yeah.
And just by luck, things that end up in the circuit court archives, you end up being lucky or unlucky because it's put in the wrong box or it's misfiled and you can't find it, or things get, there's floods and fires in Kentucky,
right?
And things don't make it to Frankfurt. But just by just by sheer luck, I think a lot of his litigation files made it to Frankfurt, and it's one of those things I was mentioning earlier. I can hold an exhibit that he used in his trial against Stagg. And you see his own words in his deposition testimony, and it's just remarkable. So he was a wealth of information, but I think we all know these sorts of people. He's litigious. He'd sue you just as soon as he look at you.
Yeah.
And I don't know that he was a good guy. We probably wouldn't like him necessarily, but he was just a force. He made things happen. So even if you don't like him, you got to admire him. And it's nice to have that kind of personality that can drive the narrative in a book.
He seemed to be a character that was, for lack of a better term, a double-edged sword. That in some situations he was a scoundrel, because if I remember from the book correctly, he had a series of barrels that he basically double sold to try to pay off debts, and then ended up leaving the state to get out from under his obligations. Is that correct?
That's right. I think, and you used the word scoundrel. I think that's dead on. So this was the time frame you're talking about is right before he went bankrupt. And to try to save his own hide, he sold the same barrels twice. And people wonder how you do that. Well, he's still aging the barrels, and he sells what's called warehouse receipts. And a warehouse receipt is something that still exists today. You can buy a warehouse receipt and keep the barrel at, Wilderness Trail, wherever it is that it's aging. You own the warehouse receipt. You own the rights to that barrel. And when it's time to come get the barrel, they're supposed to roll it out for you, or put it in a tote these days. Whatever else they're going to do. And E.H. Taylor sold warehouse receipts, some to Stagg and some to a Louisville distillery and some to a farmer from Henry County. And when the farmer from Henry County came to try to get his barrels, he found out that it had been sold to somebody else and then sold another time after that. So it's like, give me my whiskey. And Taylor couldn't do it and had to flee the state because of the public outcry. And there's this expose done by the Courier Journal, and there were mobs that were headed towards the distillery, and E.H. Taylor left his sons there to sort of defend his honor and try to calm people down.
Right.
And he eventually got his way out of it, but lost the distillery in doing so.
Right. So how long was it between that time and when he came back and built the old Taylor distillery?
He lasted, I think it was about 10 years between then and leaving for the old Taylor distillery. So it took about a year for all of that hullabaloo to die down. He was in essentially partnership with Stagg. That I think started all right in the early years. They did really well and were able to build more capacity. And then I think Taylor's just somebody who can never partner with somebody. He's always going to end up finding trouble.
Yeah.
And he found it, and he had to get out.
Yeah. Now, this was not in the book, but there were also some legal issues that came up when Castle and Key started using the Taylor distillery.
That's exactly right. So for everyone who's been there, when you come around that bend in Millville and you see the front door of the castle, there's a sign right above the castle door that says the Old Taylor Distillery Company. And when you get on the grounds and you peek around the side of the castle, it's etched into the limestone, the Old Taylor Distillery Company, 1887. If you look closely on the warehouses, in letters 20 feet high, it says Old Taylor. So everywhere you go on site, it says Old Taylor.
Right. And
the distillery had been abandoned. It had served a few non-distillery purposes over the decades. One really sad one is some Atlanta company came and took the old wood rick structures out of one of the warehouses. It was in that craze of the 80s where everyone's kitchen wanted exposed beams and those sorts of things. And one of the warehouses collapsed because they had taken too much out. Roofs were caving in, floors were sagging and falling through. It was just apocalyptic. But the folks who now own Castle and Key came back and got it remediated, got it fixed, and got sued for doing that.
Right.
Sazerac is the current owner of the brand that used to be made at the Old Taylor Distillery, and that's what we're enjoying now. This E.H. Taylor, and Sazerac thought that leaving up the signs meant that Castle and Key was using their trademark, and so they sued to try to protect what they saw as their rights. Now, a maybe problematic thing with trademark law is that if you own a mark and you think someone could be infringing, you got to protect yourself. So it encourages lawsuits that maybe otherwise ought not to be filed. And so they had to sue in some respects, or at least they'll probably tell you they thought they had to sue. But if you go there today to Castle and Key, you'll still see those signs up. So the ultimate ruling that came out on National Bourbon Day in 2018. So I think the judges, the appellate judges in Cincinnati, I think were mindful of the historical aspect of the case, ruled that they can leave the signs up because it's a place. It's the Old Taylor Distillery. It always was. It always will be. And as long as Castle and Key doesn't start putting that on a bottle, they're all right. Right.
I think they'd referred to their distillery being on the site of the Old Taylor Distillery in some marketing materials as well. And
that's right.
But the crazy thing is, I mean, Sazerac could have bought that property for basically the change that's falling out of their pants into their seat cushions there. Relatively
Out of the
speaking,
Fireball Fund.
right? Raise the price of Fireball a penny, and you bought that property, and you don't even have to worry about that, and you've got that, and you can use it for whatever you want to down the road. So that seemed kind of short-sighted on their part.
I think so too. And next time you guys are in the store and looking at the very most bottom shelf, look at Old Taylor and get back to me on what you find in a very faint sketch behind the name. So it's in the background of the label. Tell me if you think that's the OFC or you think it's the Old Taylor Distillery. And get back to me on who's using whose stuff.
That sounds like an interesting challenge. Now, we talked about Colonel Taylor being a scoundrel, but on the flip side of it, he's a hero of sorts with what he did for consumer protection. So talk to us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, this is maybe the most remarkable thing that I found as I was digging into bourbon law. And that's that before the nation protected us from bad adulterated milk, because milk in the 1800s was awful because you couldn't transport it, so people put formaldehyde in it. It got a lot of money, so that encouraged people to thin it out. But if you thinned it out, then you had to add thickeners back to make it seem like milk. So it was bad stuff. And we all, I think, remember having to read The Jungle in high school. So meat packing plants were horrible places. You didn't know what was getting into the ground meat. Candy was bad. They were adding minerals and essentially poisons to get bright colors in candy. There was no protection from the federal government for any of that. And what they decided to protect consumers from first was bad whiskey. And it blew my mind that was the first protection, but that was led by Colonel Taylor.
Yeah.
I mentioned Marion Taylor earlier. He was a rectifier. So what Colonel Taylor, E.H. Taylor, did is he railed against these rectifiers who would take neutral grain spirits, add some coloring, add some additives. Sometimes it was perfectly safe. I mean, I would say most of the rectifiers used safe coloring and flavoring additives, but you had some bad ones. You had some that were reported to use hydrochloric acid. You had some that if it wasn't dark enough, there was reports that they would pour some spit from the spittoon into it to give it a darker color. Yeah, they did some nasty things, granted. But that's who E.H. Taylor was after, and that's who he convinced the federal government were such a problem that the entire nation needed to be protected against him. So that's the Bottled and Bond Act of 1890.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I love a lawsuit out of spite that does good for the world. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great motivator.
Man, that is for sure.
Oh, that's good.
So another chapter in the book is on sourcing and fake distillers. So tell us how that was a problem then, and then we'll talk a little bit about what that means today.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're going to talk about today, because I think this is one example, and maybe there's only one or two, where something was more transparent back in time than it is today. Because what I write about in Bourbon Justice is a company called Edgewood, and it was up near Cincinnati, kind of the Maysville, Cincinnati area, was huge in bourbon production. And what the distillery wanted to do is distill for somebody else and put the other company's name all over the bottle. And so they had this whole agreement that that's what they would do, but it turned out to be a problem, because it wasn't that distillery that really made it. It was the regular distillery owners just slapping someone else's name on it. Right. And you couldn't do that then. You had to distill it in your own name, and you had to say where you distilled it by using your registered distillery number. And now today, you've got all of these brands coming from, I should say, multiple brands coming from single distilleries. Heaven Hill has, count them, you can't. Buffalo Trace has, at least probably 12 brands coming from their distillery.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the side of the bottle, it'll say things like the Elmer T. Lee Distillery or the Pappy Van Winkle Distillery. Well, guess what? There's no such damn thing as the Pappy Van Winkle Distillery. This
bottle says distilled, aged, and bottled by Old Fashioned Copper Distillery, Frankfort, Kentucky.
Yeah, that hasn't existed for a long time. Yes, it's made at Buffalo Trace.
Right.
And that's fine. It's a fantastic distillery, but all of these labels have their own kind of name on it. And it's not a real distillery except on paper. That wouldn't have been allowed before. And I remember early on in the bourbon craze when you're trying to figure out, okay, where's Costco get their bourbon? All right, it said, Claremont for a little while. That's got to be Beam, right?
Right.
And so people could start looking at the Secretary of State website and see what the DBAs, what the assumed names were for the distilleries and different bottlers, and you try to figure it out that way. Trader Joe's, you see that Barton for a while had the assumed name for whatever that brand was at Trader Joe's. So you had to figure that stuff out. But back in the day, you couldn't even do it in the first place. You had to continue to call it Barton, or you continue to call it Buffalo Trace.
Yeah. Yeah. You say in the book that part of the fun for the bourbon enthusiast is to try to figure out where this whiskey comes from. Yeah. I would argue that is not, it ceases to be fun after a while because it just, just be transparent. You don't have to be deceptive. The more transparency you've got, the more people are going to respect it, appreciate it.
I think that's right. And the biggest example, and I mentioned it really briefly in the book, but I probably could have done a whole chapter on it, is Templeton. And there was a class action settlement probably 5-6 years ago or so, because at the time Templeton's label said produced and bottled in Templeton, Iowa. And guess what? As everyone knows now, it was distilled by MGP in Indiana. They shipped it there. They maybe, it sounds like, had some kind of additive that they added to it, but they did something to it and bottled it as their own. Now, after the settlement, in letters just as big, it says distilled in Indiana now. But that's a great example. You're hiding it. You're hiding where your whiskey came from. And in some cases, you're pretending that you made it. And I think that's what Templeton was doing. They were pretending. They wanted consumers to think that it was being made in Templeton, Iowa.
Yeah. Now, there are some that source, and obviously one of the biggest sources for sourcing is MGP. But like our friend Jason Bronner has his Buzzard Roost brand. States very plainly on his label where it was distilled. I was in Wisconsin last weekend and went to a distillery called Dancing Goat, and they source 95.5 rye from MGP. Look at the back of the bottle. It says there are several whiskey brands in the country that distill or that source from the same place we do. This is what we do to make it different. I like that. Okay.
Yeah, love it all day long.
Yeah. I don't mind if you source, just tell me.
Right.
And then I can make a good judgment as a consumer.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, another thing you talked about is truth in labeling. And I think that the two have some parallels or some crossover. What do you see in labeling that from a historical standpoint and from what's going on today that are issues from a legal point of view?
Yeah, what I have seen in current day and what people have filed lawsuits about are things like the word handmade on a maker's bottle.
Yeah.
Because, it's a great tour. I love going to makers. You dip your own bottle. It doesn't get much better than that for someone who loves makers. But you look at the label and it says handmade. You go on the tour sticking their hand in the still, and no one's stirring the mash with their hands.
Right.
It literally, in a literal sense, it is not handmade, but the label still says it. So they got sued in Florida and they got sued in California, essentially identical suits. And the court ended up ruling you can leave handmade on the bottle because, damn it, no one's going to believe that it's literally handmade.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's kind of made, it's made in a way with attention to detail and it kind of in the old way. And that's really what they mean. They're not meaning literally handmade. So it's, some of it I think is getting too picky, frankly. I mean, lawyers get a bad rap because toasters say don't use in the tub, and
right.
I mean, how many warnings can you open up? You get buy anything, you open up this paper on the inside, and it's got 7 pages of warnings.
Right.
So there's overkill there. I will acknowledge that absolutely, but I think things like suing for handmade are an example of the pendulum shifting too far on the legal front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I'm not a marketing person by any means, but I don't know why that word choice being so specific would be the best course of action. I get that there's some romance behind that, but crafted artfully, put together, combined, whatever. There's so many alternatives to that. It seems like an interesting choice from Beam Suntory to keep that on their label.
That's a really good point, and I think maybe they were trying to find something other than small batch or craft.
Right.
Because those words have been used by everybody.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're totally meaningless now. And I think it's also, just like you say, they're trying to harken back to some day in the past where you did have a guy with a big paddle who was stirring the mash. Because had to do, but I don't know. It's an odd word to use, but to me, it's a harmless word to use.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Do with your time than sue makers for using the word handmade.
Right.
Yeah.
I had a conversation once with a distiller who had produced we'll call it a botanical spirit, and on the label it said homemade. Okay, so I asked the question: so all of the botanicals that went into this you grew? No. Why would you ask that? Of course not. Well, because it says on your label homemade.
It does.
So
homegrown.
I'm not trying to be or homegrown. Yeah. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck about it. But if you're saying it's homegrown, then what question would you think that I would ask? And he goes, honestly, I didn't know that was on the label. And so the next time they came out with it, that wasn't there anymore.
Wow.
But I think
you changed a label.
Yes, doggone it.
I've never changed a label. You changed it. This is great.
Well, and I think it was genuinely an honest mistake because they had somebody draw up the label for them or something, and they were trying to rush it out and didn't pay that close of attention to it, and it got by the TTB, and so there it was.
Yeah.
So
things do get by the TTB, that's for sure.
That's for darn sure.
That's what we need to do. We need to have people that don't belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and whiskey labels that should never have been approved by the TTB. That's our show. Yes. We got a topic for a future episode.
That's it. So, all right, Brian, you're now the czar of whiskey, and you get to decide this is what needs to be on a label. What's going on that label that's not there now? Or what do you change?
Yeah, I would love to have the DSP on a label because I want to know where it comes from. And that will never happen, though, because other than MGP, the distilleries who sell bulk don't want you to know that their whiskey is in a bottle that is $150 when they're selling the same thing for $40.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you're never going to see it, but I want to know where it comes from. And then, like you said, tell me what you do differently to it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you gotten a hold of some kind of barrel that you're going to do a secondary finishing in? Do you have some insane palate where it's like you're a Scotch blender and you're taking all of these different sources in, and you're getting something that's better than just the parts of it? Tell me that. Tell me that what you do.
Yeah.
Don't just take your 95.5 rye or your bourbon that you know is someone else's recipe. Tell me what you do to it. But I don't think we're ever going to see it. That's what I want to know, though. I want to know where it comes from.
Yep. I agree 1,000%.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be really interested to see what happens with Bardstown Bourbon Company in particular in coming years. Their whole business model really is based around this sourcing and contract distillation and stuff like that. I would love it if they would make a push for their clients to have that kind of transparency as a company. I get that we probably can't have the widespread legal change like we're hoping for, but I would love it if as a company they said, hey, yeah, you need to tell them we made it, but let's talk about why we chose these grains or this, aging style or whatever the case may be. I think they could set a really good, or at least cultural precedent, if not a legal one, by doing that in coming years as more of their products start to come to market.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it shows a pride in their product. I mean, if they are telling their customers, you need to put our DSP on it, or you need to say where you got it. That's pride right there. We're standing behind what we distilled. Maybe you moved it somewhere else to age it after it was here a few years, whatever else.
Sure.
But we distilled it, and we're proud of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of this can be driven by the consumer. If the consumer ultimately chooses to vote with their dollars to buy whiskey that is more transparent in their labeling, then that's going to push the marketplace to adjust and to make changes. But the issue we have now in the bourbon world is there isn't any discipline. It's hey, here's this bottle that has a really cool label on it, and nobody seems to really know where it came from or how old it is, but it's expensive, so it's got to be good.
So it must be good.
So people just keep flocking to that.
And it's limited quantity. You got to make sure to say that.
Yes. Handcrafted or something else too.
Handcrafted, right.
And a lot of them, to get into our next topic, will have a nice little wax topper on it, but it can't look like this one, can it? But before we get into Maker's Mark, we've all got a pour of this. This is the community batch Maker's Mark private selection that is sold each year by the Lee Initiative, and this one is from 2020. So,
all right.
This is a great pour, and I know everybody has maybe some mixed feelings about Ed Lee, but what he has done for the hospitality, industry, especially in Louisville and through Kentucky as well, is just incredibly impressive. If you get a chance to pick up this bottle in particular, absolutely do it. Absolutely.
It's got a great nose. That's one really nice thing that the stave finishing that they've done is, I think, really improved the typical nose of the makers.
Yep. All right, so Kevin, I've got a fat guy tasting note for you. Around Christmas time when Hershey's puts out the symphony bars, it's the dark chocolate symphony bar with the honey and the nougat and all that stuff.
Yeah, I like it. Now this is, I think 27% mocha stave. Yeah. So that would make sense.
Yeah, that does come through.
Yeah.
Which one is SP?
I think it's spice. That's 15%. Yeah. I don't have all the stave profiles memorized, and I think they've recently changed some of them.
They changed them, and I can't keep up.
Yeah.
But the stave program has always struck me as you're taking a risk, because I really think that you like the mocha staves, which I do. I've been a fan of those, but I might try to load up on them, and then I'm going to ruin it. And you don't know what you're getting until it's done.
Yeah. And it says on the label, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, barrel finished with selected oak staves.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so tell us about Maker's Mark, because there's some litigiousness coming out of that company as well.
Absolutely. It's that dripping red wax. It's a registered trademark. And yep, show that there. And no one else will have dripping wax of any color. So you've got other brands that have black wax and some colored wax.
Mm-hmm.
Look at them all. They're all neatly trimmed, other than those bottles of Pappy from whatever that was 20 years ago that make it online every 8 months or so. They had it, but other than that, you're not going to have it. And see, it was probably about 15 years ago that Diageo took one of its, maybe a little longer than that. Diageo took one of its high-end tequila brands and dripped the wax on it, and it doesn't exactly look like the same thing. It's not the same shaped bottle. It's not the same sort of, they call it free-formed tendrils of Makers. It's more of a straight line drip. But Makers still sued Diageo, and maybe to me it's an example of having a home court advantage, because they sued in Louisville, and the judges who ended up ruling on it on appeal, they wrote an opinion that was probably about 4 or 5 pages on the history of bourbon and the role of the Samuels family overall in the history of bourbon. And Bill Sr. and Marge in the kitchen and experimenting with baking bread and how it smelled. And she was a pewter fan, and that's how they came up with Makers. All this history. And then tequila, which is a hell of a lot older than bourbon whiskey, the judge spent about 3 sentences on. And right there you knew how the court was going to
game over. Yeah.
And plus Diageo, I think, didn't realize what not to argue when you're in Kentucky. They came in and they argued, well, this family reserve tequila is actually a good spirit. It's a high price spirit. It's $100 per bottle. It's not like this brown bag, $26 a bottle Maker's Mark. I mean, no one in their right mind is going to be confused as to the origin of our tequila versus this spill from Maker's Mark. You don't argue that in Kentucky. So they missed out on it. And now if you look at that same bottle of tequila, it's still got wax on the top, but just like everything else, it's neatly trimmed. And I don't think you're going to see any sort of color wax that is dripping in the slightest. I mean, the most you get now, some brands are doing like an angle dip. So it's longer on one side and goes up on the other, but you don't have any drips. You don't have any of these free-form tendrils, that's for sure. And that's because, and it makes sense. The whole point of trademark law is to, I should say maybe one of the points of trademark law is to make it easier for people to identify the product that they want. So if you're running through the store and you know you're a Makers fan and you just grab a bottle on the way to a party that you're bringing a host gift to or whatever, you want to be able to see that red wax practically out of the corner of your eye and know that that's a Makers product. Or if you're getting a cigar that's got the dripping red wax on it, you think, okay, that's connected to Maker's Mark somehow. Cool, I'm going to try that. And when you see anything that could lead you astray on that, that's going to be a trademark violation, and that's what Diageo did.
Yeah, the whole thing is fascinating. The book is terrific. I'll put this up here again. So check it out. You can find it on Amazon if you're lazy and just want to do a couple of clicks, but that's okay. Brian won't mind. Or go to some of your favorite distillery gift shops and you can get it there, or check out your local bookstore. If they don't have it, ask for it so that they'll get it. And so this is great stuff. So As we're wrapping up side A of the show, we're going to get into side B, and we're going to talk about some music stuff that'll be a lot of fun too. But before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about this Wheat Whiskey Wednesday coming up on the 28th of this month, just next week. Actually, as you're listening to this show, it is today. So this show will drop on the morning of the 28th. Then on the evening of the 28th, we're going to do this blind wheat whiskey challenge. I'm going to be moderating the tasting. We're going to have 5 wheat whiskeys that our panel is going to taste blind. We'll have Lisa Roper Wicker, who is with Widow Jane, Alan Bishop, who is at Spirits of French Lick, Steve Coombs, who's a bourbon author and blogger in his own right, and Pat and Mike from My Whiskey Den are going to be on there as well. This is going to be a lot of fun. This is an interesting segment to me. I think it's something that is going to start taking off, and you're going to see a lot more of it. So tune in Wednesday night, September 28th, 8 o'clock. You can find it on the Bar Cart Facebook page or the YouTube channel. It'll be a lot of fun. We hope to see you there.
I'm so happy to see Lisa's name on there. She is one of my all-time favorite people. Glad you guys got her there.
Yeah, she's terrific. Look forward to seeing what she has to say. So this will be fun. So, all right, we want to talk a little music, and every guest that we have on here, Brian, we ask them a few questions that are the same. So we want to start with you. What was your first album? The first album that you bought? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. It was Abracadabra by the Steve Miller Band.
Nice.
So that's going to date me a little bit. But I wore that tape out. So it wasn't an album, but I was a tape deck guy back in that time frame. And it was this time frame. I mean, my memory of a song that I'm singing is like 4th or 5th grade singing Another One Bites the Dust, because that had come out right around that time frame. And then getting Abracadabra. Then I remember hearing Centerfold on my aunt's radio and realizing my mom wouldn't like me to listen to that. So that made that whole song more interesting.
Yeah.
And
she certainly wouldn't want you to watch the music video.
No, definitely not watching that. And then getting Synchronicity and just loving that tape. But yeah, the first one overall was Abracadabra, and I still remember that tape. I wore that out.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Do you remember your first concert?
I grew up in a small town in Michigan, and this little summer festival type deal that they always had, and it was actually Deep Purple.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow!
Very cool.
Very cool.
They were already doing the summer fest. They were already that level by this time, and I won tickets on the radio station back when you could call in.
Nice.
If you're the caller, you get tickets. So that's how I got to my first concert.
Oh, that's awesome.
Very cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. Do they even do that anymore?
They can't, right? Because they don't have local numbers, I don't think.
I don't know.
Yeah. You got to do it all on Twitter now. There's a few radio stations where they'll be like, hey, we're running such and such contest this morning, but you got to tweet. It's not a call-in situation.
Yeah.
Wow. Any favorite bands, anything that you listen to now that you really love?
Well, I don't think I've matured much is what my answer is about. Because in high school, I got way into Led Zeppelin and Beastie Boys. And if you look at my Spotify playlist now, it's dominated by Led Zeppelin and Beastie Boys. So I haven't much, my wife will tell you this too. I just haven't grown up much.
That's okay.
There's a lot worse things. That you can be listening to.
Yeah. No, those are good ones. Those are definitely good ones to get fixated on and get stuck in that moment.
Yep.
What was the last concert you went to?
I haven't been to a concert since Prince came to town.
Oh,
and he did those pop-up concerts.
Yeah.
Which I'm so glad I made it to that. I mean,
Yeah.
because it was only a year after that, I think, that he died.
Yeah.
And that's so. If you all remember, he did. I think he announced one concert, and then it sold out immediately. So he did one the next night, and sold out immediately. So I went to like the midnight show. I want to say on a Thursday. So it's a school night. I got to work the next day.
Right.
Already done one show, and we get there for the 11:30 or the midnight show, and he just killed it. I mean, it was so amazing to be at that show. Wish I had a chance to do that one again for sure.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Is there anything, anybody else that you've seen that tops that in terms of a concert?
I don't think No, I think the answer is I have not seen a better concert. Yeah. Now I never did see, and I've got this vintage Beasties License to Ill New York Madison Square Gardens T-shirt.
Yeah,
I wish I had been there.
Yes.
So I'm a faker when I wear that T-shirt, but so I'm sure I would have enjoyed that one. But I don't know that there's anybody that I've seen that's been better than Prince.
So, in addition to making you the czar of all bourbon labeling, we also have a time machine.
Sweet.
Where you can go back to any point in history and you can see anybody live. Who is it and when?
God. I identify more with the Beastie Boys. I mean, I love Led Zeppelin, but I'm not of that era. So I think I'm going to the Madison Square Gardens in like '84.
Yeah.
That would be sick.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you top that. They were, coming out of punk essentially, and they were irreverent to everything. And I would love to go to that show.
Yeah. That would have been very cool. We've talked a lot about Beastie Boys on past shows and their association with Rick Rubin and what all that meant, what all the Beastie Boys meant to music, to rap music, to hip hop music, because it really took it to something that it changed the audience for that genre of music, to where suburban white kids now are like, oh wait, now I'm into this, and then they got into the Beastie Boys, and then they started going down the path of everything else in that genre, and it changed that in such a big way.
Yeah. Now, and for me, I was at the beginning of rap, so Breaking 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Yes.
Hear about that?
Yes.
But Houdini and all these early rap groups were just fantastic. So I had already liked that, and so for me to hear the Beastie Boys doing that, but in a different style that brought in the rock that I was already used to, for me it was like, you can do both of these at once. This is fantastic.
Yeah, it's very cool. So let's talk a little bit about music justice. To borrow a little bit from the title of your book.
That should be the next book, right?
Yeah, why not? I was going to ask if there's going to be a sequel. Maybe this is it. But one band that seemed to continue to find its way into legal battles is the band that's on your T-shirt, and that's Led Zeppelin. So talk to us a little bit about Led Zeppelin and Plant and Page and the things that they faced.
So Led Zeppelin is actually who got me into the blues. I went through a blues phase, I guess, more in college, and finding Howlin' Wolf and Willie Dixon and all those guys. That was because of Led Zeppelin.
Right.
And it's long before I ever had a second thought of, hey, who did Jimmy Page credit on Whole Lotta Love? He didn't credit anybody other than
credit anybody.
Yeah, so no, I wouldn't have looked at the liner notes to care who he was crediting. I certainly didn't know anything about the blues artists that he was sampling from, taking from, stealing, whatever word you want to use. But that got me into the blues. So there's at least that side, good side to it, I think, because it exposed audiences. And I know it was popular to borrow from those groups in that time frame that Zeppelin was starting. But that's sort of what they did. They would sometimes give credit to Muddy Waters. They would sometimes give credit to Willie Dixon, but mostly they did.
Right.
And then you get things like the Stairway to Heaven lawsuit that was decided by a jury in their favor, saying it did not infringe on the copyright from Spirit, which that tourist song is just absolutely god awful.
Yes.
But it didn't infringe on that. That went up on appeal. They had to have their decision. But relatively recently, we've got a ruling that Stairway to Heaven did not infringe on the copyright of Tourist.
Right.
And so I've tried to listen to the two songs ever since I first heard of that, and I don't know enough about music to really comment on it. But from what I understand, it's just a chord progression that folks like, the Beatles have the same chord progression in some songs, and Duke Ellington has the same chord progression, and you can play a lot of different songs over that same chord progression, and it's just too common. So I think what the essential ruling there is that chord progression is not a part of the overall song. I mean, they diverge in just absolutely dramatic ways, as everyone knows what happens in Stairway to Heaven. But it's just a common bit, and you can't copyright that. You can't protect that as your own because everyone does it.
Right.
But they've settled a lot of cases too. So this one has gotten a lot of the Stairway to Heaven case got a lot of press because it actually went to trial. They weren't going to settle that case, and then it went on appeal, so it got even more press. Yeah. But they settled pretty quietly in the 80s. A couple of cases with blues artists for stealing their work. So now if you I guess you don't buy a CD anymore, but now if you download the song and look at the credits on the song, you're going to see Howlin' Wolf on Killin', from his Killin' Floor now. You're going to see that credit.
Which was the Lemon song. The Led Zeppelin, the Lemon song.
The name to the Lemon song, but they used his words from Killin' Floor. And you're going to see Dazed and Confused give credit, which I didn't know this, but there's another band that did a song called Dazed and Confused, a British rock band did Dazed and Confused. And Jimmy Page, I mean, he took things from the Yardbirds. He's the guitarist for the Yardbirds, and he took the exact same riff that he did there from the Yardbirds. So it definitely wonders if that's part of what music is you play something one place, you hear something another place, you meld the two a little bit, and you make it different enough to be your own. But there's a lot they didn't make too terribly different.
Right. A Whole Lot of Love is basically You Need Love, which was performed by Muddy Waters, written by Willie Dixon.
Yep.
And you listen to Muddy Waters' version of You Need Love, it's Whole Lot of Love. Yeah. It just is. But you going back to the Stairway to Heaven suit, Taurus claimed that because they were on the same concert bill back in 1970 with Led Zeppelin, that Jimmy Page would have heard their song and then stole it to write the opening guitar sequence to Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah. So what I lack in knowing about music, I at least know on the legal side and the legal standard there. The reason that they had to prove he would have known is because when it's a simple chord progression in the music side, one of the things you have to prove is that the other artist, the defendant, would have had an opportunity or should have heard it or would have heard it, would have known about it. But then the next piece of it is that it has to be the phrase is virtually identical, and they're similar. They're both what, A minor, Drew? I mean, they're really similar, but they're not virtually identical.
Right.
And when you look at the overall melody that's layered over Stairway to Heaven, it's totally different because there's not any overlay or notorious. Right. It's literally just that chord progression. Nothing over the top. And Led Zeppelin had that. So as far as I've tried to do, I've done some reading on the case. I've read the opinion, and I think that's where it's coming down. Is it's got to be identical. It's not identical. Plus, it's just a common chord progression.
Yeah, it's literally, this is way music nerdy, that doesn't matter, but that's literally the second key you learn when you learn any instrument, because it has no sharps or flats. So other than C major, it is the basic key that every piano student learns. You play songs on it on the recorder in third grade to torture your parents. Like, that's the one. So yeah, that's an uphill battle if you're trying to sue for just a song in A minor.
So, but Drew, what's that say about Jimmy Page, who is, a wizard and so complex that he's using something that's so common? Yeah.
I think the best ones do it. The other big example, I don't think he was ever involved in any legal troubles, is B.B. King. Guitar legend, right? Everybody knows B.B. King, but his big thing is it's not the notes that you play or how busy it is. It's knowing when to play the right note at the right time. It's very simple music, in basic keys and that kind of a thing. So yeah, I think that says a lot about the creativity of Mr. Page.
Yeah. I mean, because Led Zeppelin had songs that were so complex they couldn't play them live.
Right.
So we're not talking about, he's just some hack that doesn't have any talent, so he's just ripping everybody off. Yeah. I don't think that's what anybody here is saying in the slightest.
No.
Not at all. But if you go back through some of these, and we do a playlist with most every show that we do, that we put in the notes of the show, and we'll put in a playlist this time that will have the Stairway to Heaven song and then Spirit by Taurus, so everybody can go back through and listen to it. We don't play copyrighted music on this show, because guess what? They would take the show down. Thank you, YouTube. But we'll put all this out here for everybody to listen to, including all the different. I mean, there are probably 5 different Led Zeppelin songs without even trying hard that we can include in this playlist that they faced some sort of legal hassle over. Now, another one that we wanted to talk about was this Marvin Gaye, the estate of Marvin Gaye versus Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams.
Right. That one, I think at first glance, you would think, why isn't that the same ruling as the Led Zeppelin one? Because you've got a common chord progression in the one, and in the other, you just have what they're alleging in that case, in the Marvin Gaye case, is essentially the background vibe. It's that kind of party sound that's in the back. It's the groove. And normally in these cases, you're focused on the melody and the lyrics and the actual notes. And here it's just the groove. So the defense from Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams is, there was a couple problems in the defense, but mostly it was, you can't trademark or not trademark. You can't copyright a vibe, a groove. That's not flexible. They ran into some problems because at first Robin said that he was too high to have been the one to be responsible for it.
Right.
And then later he's interviewed by GQ or something, and he says, "Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was totally responsible for it." At one point, Pharrell Williams says he didn't have anything to do with it. Then later in another lawsuit or in another interview, he says, yeah, we were going for that groove from the Marvin Gaye song, Got to Give It Up. I couldn't think of it for a second.
Yeah.
So they had some problems in their defense. So from an overall perspective, if we're going to compare the two, and if we're going to have a general legal lesson, it's don't admit anything. Don't be given interviews. Don't say shit to anybody when you've got to give a deposition or trial testimony. Just zip it up, guys.
Yeah.
And I think Led Zeppelin was pretty good about that. And their attorneys were good at, okay, don't say anything outside of court. But Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams were just giving interviews all over the place. Because, it's a popular song, right? It made gazillion dollars. And maybe that's when you get a copyright infringement case, is only when the song is successful. Robert Plant has even got a quote about that. He's like, yeah, we're going to do that because we're only going to get sued if the song is successful. And okay, we've got worse things to worry about.
Right.
If we get sued, that's great. I'd love to get sued because that means we're successful.
Yeah.
But here the court ended up making this is kind of a new phase because it allows protection for that groove. When you're not looking at just melody, you're not looking at just the notes and the lyrics. The groove can be protected. So that part of it is new. But you listen to the two, and it's damn obvious, I think, that they were going for that same groove. It is almost identical. So if you go to that standard of being virtually identical, it's virtually identical.
Yeah, I think Pharrell Williams, I don't remember if it was in part of his court testimony or in another one of these interviews that he did, but they played for him the bass line to Gotta Give It Up and the Blurred Lines back to back. And his comment was, sounds like the same song to me. So, okay, just shoot yourself in the foot. And,
yeah, exactly.
Or in your big goofy hat.
Did you hear that, Judge? Yeah.
But there are a lot of cases like that. And if you listen to enough music, you're going to find things that you're like thinking, this sounds exactly like something else. And I had that happen. And Andrew, we talked about it on a show where the Black Keys came out with a new album this year, and liked the album fine. And I like the Black Keys a lot. But there's a song on there called Baby, I'm Coming Home that when the song started, I was just listening to it. I wasn't looking at the song tracks or anything. So I didn't know what it was, but I thought, they're doing a cover of Midnight Rider. This is cool. But it is exactly the beginning of Midnight Rider. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I know those guys have heard that song. Okay. Everybody's heard that song. But it's on the album. There are no writing credits to any of the Allman Brothers. So I was just stunned that made it on the album. But things like this happen, and then it's brought to somebody's attention, and then they'll backtrack and give a writing credit, or, oh, wow, I didn't even think about that, and just try to make it go away, right?
And with the library that's out there, and with as many songs as artists have heard, and as many influences as artists have, some of that's got to seep in. I mean, and I'll believe them when they say that it's practically subconsciously, that something has got to seep in. If that's your influence, you are going to sound something like whatever it was that influenced you.
Yeah. Another big case, or several big cases, revolved around Napster. So what was, for those that don't know, that are too young to remember, Napster.
Are they of drinking age yet?
I don't know. Napster was a peer-to-peer file sharing service that basically people would upload music to these files, and then everybody else could just go online and then download the music. And they had 80 million monthly users at their peak, and had 2 billion with a B file transfers a month. That's just insane.
Absolute insanity. Absolute. And so this goes back to when in my day, when you bought a tape, there's a little C with a circle around it. It's copyright protected. And back in that day, you made mixtapes. You had the dual cassette,
Yes.
and you made your girlfriend a mixtape, whatever.
Yes.
That's fine. It's your own essentially personal use. Or if you've got a car where you can load a CD in and put it on an internal drive, that's for your own use. So you're ripping that, but it's still for your own personal use. But what that little C means, technically, is that you can't give it away, or you can't sell it. You especially can't sell it to anybody else. You are buying the cassette, or you are buying the actual round disc that has the music on it, but you're more almost being licensed the right to listen to what's on that CD. So as soon as you start sharing it beyond the scope of that license, it's theft. It's there's no really better way to put it.
Right.
So even when you're Napster and you get to say this defense of, well, we're not really doing it. All we're doing is we're letting Kevin and Drew's computers talk to each other. We're indexing it, but we can let Kevin find out that Drew downloaded Spaghetti Incident, and now Kevin can download it.
Right.
That's allowing theft.
Right.
It's allowing illegal activity. And so maybe there's a corollary to bourbon secondary market and Facebook. Let's not go there.
No, let's not.
Let's stay away from that one. But it's this peer-to-peer is allowing theft of the artist's intellectual property, of their copyright protected material. And I love so Metallica is the first one to sue. They're followed a few weeks later by Dr. Dre suing, a few others. So they really started this lawsuit. And unfortunately, they, I think, got this reputation by having to sue as either they sold out to the man, or they're against innovation, or they're against their fans even,
right?
Or that they're in it for the money. But they had this great quote about it's, if I want to give my shit away for free, then I have to be the one to decide that, not somebody else. And that's totally true. I mean, this is their property, and you got to protect an artist's rights. I mean, from me with the book, it's like if someone were to photocopy the pages and bind it and sell it for $3, they can't do that. I've got copyright protections over this. Or the electronic version, it's you can get it on a Kindle. If somehow you crack that code and start selling electronic versions, you're violating the copyright.
Right.
Maybe my fans will be happy because they get the book for free. And I know for Napster, the people who loved these artists were happy that they could get the music for free.
Yeah, but then you're basically eating your seed corn, to use an agricultural corollary. Because if the artists whom you claim to love can't make a living selling the music that you claim to love, then guess what? They're going to stop making that music.
That's right.
Ultimately, you got to get a paycheck, and they've got to put bread on their table, just like those of us that listen to the music do. So, which the whole file sharing thing, I think the artists got smart when they started calling it piracy, because that really put that negative connotation on it that should have been there. I don't think they wanted to call their fans thieves, but if you call the process music piracy, then people are going to think twice before they start downloading that music.
That's right. And what struck me is everyone will rail against, they just say China as if the government's doing it, but they say, China steals intellectual property, or, they'll give you bootleg movies and compact discs and all these sorts of things. That's piracy. Everybody hates it when China does it, or you get it from Taiwan or wherever else is doing this and getting it here. But when it's just, the three of us sharing music, what's wrong with that? I mean, that's the mentality, and that's the hurdle that they had to overcome. And Metallica and Dr. Dre really, I think, kind of took one on the chin a little bit for doing that. But there's got to be somebody who takes the lead.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This has been fascinating. Really wonderful conversation. And I think that there's what we'll need to do is we need to do part 2 of this at some point, Brian, and talk about some of the whiskey lawsuits and legal things that some of which may be in the book, some of which may have happened after the book was written. Maybe we can to encourage you towards a sequel, and then talk about some more of these music lawsuits as well, because it's a pretty long list that we could dive into with that too. So
there's a lot of material, so I'm in.
Well, this has been, like I said, this has been a lot of fun. And I hope that the people that are watching and listening are enjoying it as well. And Brian, hope you had a good time with us here. This has been a really fun show.
Yeah, I've had a blast. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah. So before we get out of here, I want to give everybody a chance to say where they can be found on social media or promote whatever they would like to. So Brian, let's just start with you and tell everybody where they can find you.
Yep, you can find me on all the socials with varying degrees of activity, but all the socials at Sippin' Corn. It's SIPPNCORN. And then if you want to just do a search, you can get me on bourbonjustice.com or sippincorn.com. Cheers, guys.
Yes.
Awesome.
Drew, how about you?
Yes. Yep. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter is at DrewCrawley63. Mostly I'm just being an asshole on there. And then on Instagram, you can find me at DrewCrawley or Drew.Crawley63. That's where I primarily post on music and things like that coming up, live dates and new releases and all that kind of stuff. Also, Kevin and I will be down at Bourbon on the Banks. So if you're there here in a couple of weeks when this comes out, or 2 or 3 days when this comes out, I guess, come say hi. Right. So we'd love to see you in person too.
Yeah, please do. As for the show, you can find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group. Come get on our Facebook group, because what we want to know is, what are you drinking and what are you listening to while you're drinking it? So just hop in there. We've just started this Facebook group. We want to create a little bit of a community atmosphere about it and let people get some ideas about new music from different sources, different whiskeys that people may be on top of. So look us up on Facebook. You can subscribe to the show on YouTube and watch the show. You can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast platforms as well. So, Drew, we've got a show coming up next week that is going to be, it'll be a little different on the intelligence scale, intelligence spectrum from this one.
Potentially,
yes. Brian smarted us up a good bit here. I'm not sure what's going to happen next week, but it'll be fun.
Yeah. So we're going to have a new whiskey, new music show. We like to do those from time to time, talk about an artist or a record that we love. But my band, the Wild Boys, are going to be joining us. We are all in the same state and actually in the same house right now. So we'll be talking about some new music and whiskey that we like.
That'll be fun.
It's going to be a good time.
All right. Hey, until next time, I want to thank Brian again. What a fantastic guest and a really fun show. But on behalf of Brian, Drew, and myself, thank you for watching and joining us. Cheers, love, and free bird.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.